What is going on, investors? Hopefully, you guys are having a great day out there. Time to talk about one of the largest companies in the stock market, and that is Microsoft Corporation, ticker symbol MSFT. The company just reported their earnings, and we will absolutely go over them today. We'll take a look at the revenue, the profit, the balance sheet, the cash flows, all the things that I think you need to know if you're going to buy, sell, or hold Microsoft stock. And lastly, we will get over to the stock chart on this one. This one is selling off about 3% in the after hours. You might ask yourself, have we broken this uptrend? Is technically the stock going to break down, which would mean the lower prices in the future potentially for Microsoft, which could be good if you want to add to your shares, or even if you wanted to go sell short a company of this side, which I personally would not recommend. We got a $2.1 trillion valuation on this one. They do pay $2.24 per share on the dividend. That's less than 1% yield. Now, when we get over to the financials on this company, we will see a company with 130. This is not 130,000. It's not 130 million. This is 130 billion with a B, $billion worth of cash. And what has Microsoft been doing over the last 6 months or so? They've been trying to spend that money. They tried to buy TikTok. That did not work, but they have completed some other acquisitions as well. Now, they also tried to buy Discord for $10 billion. That did not work as well, but they were able to land cybersecurity firm Risk IQ. They were able to acquire Referral Labs, which is an IoT firmware security company, and the biggest acquisition, which still needs to go through regulatory approval, which is why they still have $130 billion and not $20 billion less on that, is because they agreed to buy Nuance Communications for $20 billion. Again, that deal needs to go through all the proper regulatory things, which not necessarily a small feat in today's age. Now, let's jump over to the numbers. These were just released about 10 minutes ago, so I will walk you through these as best I can and help you understand what has been going on over at Microsoft. First thing I want to look at is just their entire this is basically Microsoft's entire product, at least what matters to investors. And what I always jump to is Azure, which is their cloud computing. That is still growing at a 51% clip, 45% if you factor in constant currency. That is fantastic. That, I believe, is about where it was last quarter when we analyzed this. They were growing that at 51%. The other thing that I like to look at is LinkedIn. That is growing at 46%. Their LinkedIn marketing solutions is growing at 97%. You might ask, well, why do I look at LinkedIn next? Well, Microsoft is trying to buy stuff like Discord. They're trying to buy stuff like TikTok and that types of stuff. So I like to see that something that they've already acquired in that same realm, like LinkedIn, which is kind of like a social network for professional people. Well, I like to see that they're able to monetize this asset. It makes me believe that if they acquire a Discord at some point or a TikTok like asset, they're going to be able to monetize that asset. Now, they've got Office 365, obviously kind of the bread and butter of the business. Up at the top, you got Windows OEM kind of ticking down a little bit, but all things being considered, those are gigantic businesses where they have a huge competitive advantage against other competitors. Now, let's jump over to the numbers. We've got our 3 months ended here on the two right-hand columns. The far left-hand column is our most recent numbers, which just came out, and the previous column to its right is last year for a 3 months basis. We also got 12 months ended. Today was the end of the fourth quarter for Microsoft, so they give you a full year view into 2021 revenues versus 2022 revenues. We've got our revenue on the top line, product coming in at about $19 billion, service and other coming in at $27 billion. We were at $19 billion in the previous quarter. That is absolutely electric growth you're seeing on the product side, basically flat. You're seeing that hold true for the 12 month as well. We're up about $3 billion on the product side, but look at service and other up from $75 billion up to $97 billion. That gives us total revenues in the quarter at $46.1 billion. We were sitting at about $38 billion in the previous quarter, which means they bolted on about $8 billion worth of revenue over the last 12 months. That is basically $2 billion a quarter. that Microsoft is growing onto its business. It's absolutely phenomenal when you look at it from that sense. Now, for the last 12 months, went from 143 up to 168. That's obviously in billions of dollars. Now, here's why I love Microsoft. This is why I'd run a Friday show where we talk about all the FANG stocks. I certainly could run a show where I talk about the more popular stocks at the current time, whether it's GameStop or Bitcoin or other types of things. The reason why I focus primarily on the major FANG stocks plus Microsoft in particular is because of these gross margins. Take a look on the product side. We spent $4.3 billion to make this 18.9. So while I know that number is not growing, we spent actually less money to earn this $19 billion. Now take a look at services. It gets even better. We spent $9.7 billion to make $27 billion. You would do that every single day of the week. It doesn't matter what business you are in. Now, on the full year, we spent $34 billion to make this $97 billion on the service side and $18.2 billion to make $71 billion on the product side. It's just absolutely phenomenal. So we take a look at total cost of revenue. Fractionally up, like up $1.6 billion on the total cost on the quarterly basis. Again, we grew by $8 billion. Our cost of that revenue barely went up. It's almost a rounding error when you look at these numbers. And the same thing holds true for 6 months as well. 12 months, we went from 46 billion up to 52 billion on the full year on the cost side. That gives us massive gross margins over at Microsoft, as you can imagine, since you take total revenue minus cost of revenue and you get this gross margin. I love companies with huge gross margins. Take a look on $46 billion worth of revenue. You cleared $32 billion of gross margin, gross profit. That is absolutely amazing. And it allows you to reinvest in your business, buy other companies, and just absolutely crush the competition. And that is why I love these tech stocks. Now, we do have R&D, we do have sales and marketing, and we do have G&A expenses as well. And we see over the last year on the quarterly basis, up fractionally. Same thing for the full year. Just up fractionally. That just shows you this is a well-oiled machine. This is not one of those upstart tech stocks that, yes, they're showing fantastic growth on the top line, but they don't flow any of it down to either the growth side or especially the operating side. So we take our revenues, we minus off our cost of revenues, we get to gross profit. We take gross profit and we minus off all our expenses here, which barely grew over the previous quarter, and that gives us operating income, as you can imagine, up big time. We were at $13.4 billion in last quarter. Now we're at nearly 20 billion, $19.1 billion of operating income for the last 3 months. Over the last 6 months, you're sitting at about $70 billion and you were at $53 billion the previous year. This company just continues to grow and grow and grow. And you see on the earnings per share side, on the diluted side, you earn $2.17 in a quarter. Their dividend rate for the whole year is $2.24. That is the other reason why I like holding Microsoft stock, is because if I'm going to hold it for 10, 20, 30 years, and this type of performance can continue, maybe not this fantastic performance, but earnings like this can continue, you better believe Microsoft is going to be able to increase that dividend and increase it substantially over the life of in which you hold the stock. And I don't want to get into a whole video, but dividend growth is almost or more important than the actual yield and the dividend rate you get from the company. And that's also why I like these companies. Balance sheet over at Microsoft. We got our current assets. We talked about how we have 130 billion. Now we were sitting at 136. They've done some acquisitions. We'll talk about share buybacks and things like that when we get to cash flows. Some cash is melted out of at least the cash portion of the business, but to go from 136 down to $130 billion, again, almost a rounding error when you're talking about that much cash. Now, the company does have some long-term debt sitting down here at about $50 billion. That's down from about, we'll call that about $60 billion. A lot of it or some of it flowed up here to the current portion of long-term debt. So anytime you see long-term debt goes down, doesn't necessarily mean that the company paid down debt. What can happen is it flows up into the current portion. And we see we went from 3.75 up to about $8 billion. Current portion of long-term debt is debt. Think about it as the mortgage payments you owe over the next 12 months. and your long-term debt is the mortgage payments you need to make over the next 20 years or however long your mortgage is. Moving on to cash flows, we pull down a phenomenal net income number for the last 3 months of $16 billion. And for the 12 months, we pull down a net income number of, just wait for it, $61.2 billion. Net income of $61 billion. A lot of companies are not even there from a revenue perspective. This company is netting out, which is factors in all expenses at $61 billion. Now, it does factor in things like depreciation, stock-based compensation, and other types of things which are not necessarily cash. That gets us down to net cash from operating activities down here at $22 billion. Running the company, Microsoft earns $22 billion, over $22 billion. We're sitting at about $19 billion in the previous period. For the 12 months, we're sitting at $76 billion. It's hard to say these with straight face, but it is absolutely phenomenal. Now, financing, they've done some share purchases here. We've done some dividends paid as well. Take a look at the share repurchases over the last year. $27 billion worth of Microsoft stock bought back by the company. So if you want to go short this stock, keep in mind that the company's got a lot of ammunition to buy more of this stock if it needs to. Now, they did do some purchase of investment, acquisition of companies. That's the other reason why I know that Nuance deal probably hasn't closed, because that was a $20 billion acquisition, and I see over the last year, we're only sitting about $9 billion on that acquisition side. So at some point, that acquisition will likely roll through this balance sheet. You will have, I wouldn't say a considerable amount of less cash, but this will peel off quite a bit unless for some reason Microsoft does maybe a stock deal in that, or issues more shares for that, or issues more debt to complete that deal. I don't know if they will do that or not. That is Microsoft's fundamental from a technical perspective. I'm going to draw a line in here so you can easily see where the stock price is trading right now. It's right at this line, right about $279 per share. Earlier in the day, we were up here closer to about $290 per share. And so you might ask yourself, well, we have broken this trend line. And that is true, but there's a couple ways you can look at this. So we can take out this trend line, and what I see is Microsoft is still in what I would call this type of uptrend. And yes, we have pulled back up. We came all the way back up here, way above this new trend line that I drove in, and we're making a pull back. Now, in the very, very, very short term, what you don't necessarily want to see with Microsoft, and this is if you don't want to buy it at a lower price. Personally, I'd like to buy more shares of Microsoft. I'd like to buy this thing on a pullback. You're looking for a break really below this 275. Okay, like I said, in the after hours, we're sitting at 279. But it could be that just technically the stock kind of tops out here. Buyers kind of dry up here, and you come down here to 275. I would expect some support here from Microsoft at 275. This is where Microsoft could potentially bounce. Okay, we could bounce here at 275, come back up, retest these highs, maybe go buy them, maybe get rejected. We could bounce around in this level. The other scenario is we break 275. If you break 275, these levels back in play. The previous highs on Microsoft back at 260 are in play, and in my opinion, anywhere between 240 and 260 on this stock is absolutely a decent buying opportunity. Now, is it once in a lifetime? Is it an amazing buying opportunity? Not necessarily, but it wouldn't be an area where I would just unload my entire bank account to buy this stock. And I probably wouldn't do that for any stock for that matter, but any pullback back to this trend line as well. And remember, as the days go on, the trend line goes higher and the pullback price gets higher as well. So I just want you to keep that in mind. But any pullback below 275 would trigger, in my opinion, potentially the 260s back in play. That can be a buying opportunity. If we get to 275 and come back up and bounce back down, that can be a buying opportunity as well, as we reconfirm 275 as a buying level. I personally am looking through the lens of this is I want to buy more Microsoft stock. And so that kind of might skew my view. If you want to go short Microsoft, or if you're not as bullish as this stock after looking at these financials, I'm not exactly sure how you wouldn't be, even when you factor in a lot of this growth as well. I'm not exactly sure how you could not be very, very bullish this stock, but that is the lens I am viewing this out of. That was Microsoft's Q4. They are heading into Q1, and we'll see how the rest of the year treats Microsoft. That wraps up this video. Consider hitting that like button and that subscribe button as well. It would greatly, greatly appreciated by me. Thanks for tuning in today. Good luck with your investments.